So, our first speaker tonight is Mr. Dave West. He is here all the way from the US of A. He is the CEO of Scrum.org, which I think is the largest Scrum certification body.
I mean, you could argue, yes, it's the largest certification body for sure.
We're going to say that tonight, yes.
Not necessarily the largest training.
I think you just said 8,000 people, 8,000 new certs a month.
Yeah.
Wow, some lot, yeah. Scrum is not dead, apparently. So, yes.
Hurrah.
So, but obviously, Dave in his travels around the world speaks to lots and lots of businesses, is involved in lots and lots of conversations about how things are changing, has lots of ideas. It's going to be a great conversation tonight, and we're going to obviously discuss it again at the panel, on the panel afterwards. But please give him a super warm welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Dave, CEO of Scrum.org, as I already said. I'm based in, as you can tell from my accent, I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts. It is funny, this is the first time I've been back to Leeds, probably, well, certainly since I moved to America. So I'm probably 28 years ago, I came to Leeds. That was the last time. But I went to university in Huddersfield. So, because it was cheaper than Leeds, ridiculously expensive Leeds, when, you know. And so I used to come here a lot there was a wine bar and Yates's wine bar we used to hang out at, and there was a couple of clubs we used to go in Leeds. So thank you for inviting me back. It is though it looks completely different, it's a lot cleaner than it was 30 years ago, right? Not as much dog poop everywhere now. I guess some things in the world have got better. Not many, but at least that, hey. So I'm based in Boston, and I lived in America 26 years. My boss, chairman of the board, is like Frank Sinatra of Agile, is Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum. So I'm fortunate enough to have him moan at me on a regular basis. He is the worst helicopter parent in the world. He flies in, or he's more like a seagull actually, he sort of flies in, steals your chips and poops all over everything. So, which is great. But today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the future of Scrum. And I'm going to be talking about it in the context of something that is really, really scary, actually, AI. Not scary from robots taking over the world, sort of like that, though that may happen. The little robot dogs? My youngest son's school is next door to that factory. So you're driving up to drop him off, and every morning I try to do the drop off. Pickup's awful. You don't want to do that. So you drop him off, and in the car park are robot dogs chasing people and stuff like that, because they've got a big order. ICE have put a big order in there for robot dogs with guns along the border. So maybe the world, maybe it is going to be more like Terminator. But the reason why I'm worried really isn't that. It's more that we have this huge opportunity, and we don't seem to do well with huge opportunities, as we sort of wreck things. And I think there's a really interesting coming to pass of how organizations that haven't done that well with Agile are going to be put to a serious test. And that's what I'm going to sort of be talking about today. I've been trying to make a sense of it all. I've been talking to a lot of organizations. I have a little podcast thing, and I've been interviewing quite a few people, people that are CTOs at large organizations. Mick Kirsten was on the podcast. He's actually coming back for a second one because he talks so much. All these interesting people, and I've been really trying to understand how is it affecting AI, how's it affecting teams? How's it, affecting scaling approaches? Do we still need scaling approaches? The productivity that you can get out from Claude Code, which is what I'm the most familiar with, I'll be honest, is just mind-blowing how fast and how able it is to build incredibly robust, though obviously not perfect, and we always built perfect apps, software and apps, which is incredible. What does the operating model for the modern organization really look like? Because I don't think it is the operating model that most of you operate within. And so that's what I've been really really looking at, and I am very interested, obviously, maybe a little biased to my interest here, to what is the future of Scrum. And I'm going to be posing some questions around Scrum as we go through this, because as you well know, Scrum was developed in response to a series of constraints that might not be constraints anymore. The constraint of not actually knowing how fast or how slow you can build software, the constraints about delivering what done is. Those sort of constraints may have changed. I'm going to be talking more about that in a minute. I'm also a big fan of Simon Sinek. I don't know if you've read, many of his books, but this is a particularly interesting book, The Infinite Game, because most organizations have adopted Scrum and Agile as a game that isn't infinite, that you can finish, that you're done, that you can get to an end and you can win. And that is perpetuated by organizations like McKinsey and BCG. No insult to those organizations, they're amazing companies. However, they have to do that because they have a statement of work and it's got an end. And then they move on to the next thing. You introduce the Spotify model, you're done. Even though there's no such thing as it. But anyway, so I was sort of inspired by some of this. So I've tried to weave this into my presentation to sort of make it a little bit interesting. I live in the United States of America. Every morning I am woken up by, what the fuck has he done today? and sorry to swear, but uncertainty is the future of the world that we live in. The surprises aren't going to be rare, they're going to be frequent. Now, that might stop in November if we turn both houses, but the reality is that we live in an uncertain world, and that's only going to get worse. I was at Land Rover the last time I was in the UK, and I was meant to be meeting all the execs, and I was about to do this meeting, and they went, sorry, we can't. I was like, why that? Well, they'd just been hacked, and their biggest market is the United States of America, and they just put in a 50% tariff because Starmer and Trump had done the whole thing, and it was just ridiculous. So that meeting obviously got cancelled because chaos reigns. So change used to be measured in at least quarters, probably years, and now it's going to be measured in hours. Hours is ultimately, the sort of well, particularly if you use Twitter or anything like that, X, that you see the amount of changes that are happening on an hour-by-hour basis, which is really worrying. Things like AI capabilities, markets is changing, basically, your plans that you made last year, if they're not out of date, you're doing one of those emu things or ostrich things. I don't know. The one that sticks its head in the ground. So I think we all know that. And a lot of organizations in the response to this ever-changing world have done some really interesting things. They've frozen all their Agile investments, fired loads of Scrum Masters. Hang on. Have you read the job well, actually, most of the job descriptions of Scrum Masters are really project managers that do Scrum. But if they really looked at this set of people, what your job is every day is to manage that messy interaction between humans and technology in pursuit of customer value. That's what you do every day, in spite of the environment that's going and all the changes, etc. Your job is to manage uncertainty. Your job is change management, number one. They've also gone back to ridiculous command and control routines. And the reason why they've done that is because, it's I think you do Myers-Briggs, right? That mind thing. And what they say is, on the survey, I'm an ENTJ. I put it in my dating profile. It didn't help. ENTJ. They say that it's not, that this is who. It isn't that this defines you as a personality. However, when you're stressed, it is. And organizations are currently under a lot of stress, which is very, very, very worrying. What they should have done, though, is double down on a fundamental tenet of the Agile movement, which is empirical process. They should have doubled down on small bets. They should have doubled down on transparency. They should have doubled down on empowered teams. They should have doubled down on change. And uncertainty is a great signal to continue that. People say, how do you judge the effectiveness of agility? Ultimately, it's how fast you can respond to the environment around you. But that's not what most people measure in terms of Agile. It's velocity, it's, dare I say, how many people trained, how many squads, etc. How many JIRA tickets are we moving? But ultimately, we need to work in a very different way, but that isn't what we've done. And the Agile is Dead movement has definitely grown pace. Though my experience with all of these movements, and I was the product manager of RUP when we were the market-leading SDLC, and these Agile people, don't know what they're talking about. So change can happen, but ultimately, most people that are driving this movement have got something to sell. And don't get me wrong, I have something to sell as well. So everything should be dealt with in that context. 63%, there's a McKinsey, more likely to miss targets if Agile investment is cut. So I'm fortunate enough to work with a lot of very interesting people, or get to talk to them. I wouldn't say I don't really work. That sounds awful. Anyway, when I talk to these interesting people, one of them is the head of, he was the head of technology R&D at BMW. And he moved into manufacturing. He moved into manufacturing, so he's head of technology for manufacturing for BMW. And he moved in the day COVID kind of became a big thing in Germany. Great timing, he said. And obviously one of the characteristics of the pandemic was that you couldn't get chips. The supply chains broke on an almost hourly basis, and he was thrown into that. And he described his use of Agile is the only way they could survive. So he moved sprints to weeks. The planning process was very much influenced what was coming in, what wasn't coming in. Dailies were incredibly powerful. Sprint reviews provide us, what could we learn? How could we adapt and they ran that continuously. And McKinsey actually have data to support that. It's just interesting that most organizations, whether they call it Agile or not, are continuing to invest in the practices necessary to deliver technology, and they're being more successful. However, the death of Agile really isn't because of these people trying to sell the next thing. It's because most organizations have never really done it. That isn't true. A lot of organizations have. However, it hasn't become mainstream in those organizations. Fidelity Investments were the third company to do Agile, second or third, depending on who you ask. And don't ask Jeff, because that varies on a almost hourly basis, sort of about uncertainty. But what was interesting is Fidelity were very successful. In fact, as Ken describes it, it was so successful, my daughter could afford to go to Harvard. And Kerry went to Harvard because of the success of the program that they rolled out. However, after that, they were massively unsuccessful frequently until the next crisis came along, and then they were successful with Scrum again. It required a crisis. It's like, I remember continuous delivery. I used to go into organizations all the time and talk about continuous delivery, back in the day when we were all cool. And I'd go, and they say, well, we can't do that. And I say, oh, we've got governance, compliance, SOX, HIPAA, all these things. And I say, great. Have you ever had any production bugs? And they'd say, yeah, we've had a couple, but don't tell you. Yeah, once in a while, but they do it in a sort of, once in a while we have something. I say, and you fix them, right? Yeah. Really quickly. Yeah. And so you can release to production really quickly. Yeah. When, in a crisis, but you can't do it when it's not a crisis. Well, yeah, but we build a cross-functional team and empower them. Interesting. We trust them. Oh, that's interesting. So it just shows you Organizations in crisis can actually be very agile. Unfortunately, that isn't the norm. What the norm is, water scrum full. Like, we've been talking about agility for 30 years, and business and technology are still separate. Still. In technology companies, financial institutions is a great example. Banks are technology companies. So why is technology treated as a service to them, like the lights and the heating and the power and the HR? And it blows my mind. Now, modern finance companies, usually being sponsored by Peter Thiel, are not that way. Ooh, there's a surprise, right? Isn't that an interesting surprise? Bureaucracy and hierarchy optimized for control, not value. I don't mind bureaucracy. I don't mind hierarchy as long as it's optimized for value, which is a very different bureaucracy and a very different hierarchy. And of course, getting things wrong is obviously a lot more important than getting things right. Don't get things wrong. That is the essence of most organizations. How many times have you been at a meeting where people are discussing a feature that you want to roll out, and there's all the debate, and somebody says, well, what happens if we release it? And they're like, well, you know, if it's right, people might not like it. And there's a lot of, well, that actually won't be a problem. Well, will you get fired if you release it and it's wrong? No. Well, then why are we even debating it? Get it out. So ultimately, I think the Agile movement has been forced into this place. But maybe we have a knight in shining armor. So we've tried to accelerate delivery predominantly without accelerating the system that governs, inspects, and adapts to that output. AI is coming along and making that incredibly clear. Scrum teams can deliver massive productivity. That's been proven in report after report, but in most organizations they don't. Now, because we've just bought 3 million tokens, we're using AI, and it's even more productive, so it's even more obvious that delivery is not the bottleneck. Governance, innovation, that's the bottleneck. Deciding what to do, deciding why to do it, that's the bottleneck. Making sure that it's compliant, making sure that choices are clearly understood and implications managed. That's the bottleneck. Not releasing product, not building product, not developing product. And of course I'm biased, and all of you cynics in the room will be saying, well, of course you are. You've got a mortgage to pay. Yes, I do. And I'd be wrong. But Scrum is founded on empiricism. That was the one thing that Ken brought to Scrum that I think is incredibly important. The idea that you build these little chunks of value and you learn and you try them, and then there's two basically learning cycles. One about the product that you're building, the incremental improvements to the product you're building, and the other one is how you're building it. Those two cycles run continuously. That's just the nature of Scrum. Making things visible through transparency, inspection, being honest and open. And then adaptation is actually the ability to make changes. We're not bad at transparency. We're just crap at inspection and adaptation, usually in most organizations. And it's funny, so the latest Gillette razor was built using Scrum. The exfoliating razor, I wanted it renamed to the Scrum razor. Apparently that didn't go well in their marketing trials. And it was a great example of transparency. So they had multiple teams working together. And this is not a software project. This is a real product. And they were designing it and doing all this stuff. And it was a disaster project, so they brought in Scrum to try something different. And they realized that they couldn't build it based on the cost constraint that they thought the CEO had put in place. So they had a sprint review, they raised it, and the CEO said, oh no, I just said that in passing. I didn't think that. Oh my God, no, let's up the price, make it a high value, And they got behind that and released it. And there was a Super Bowl ad, so it obviously was real. So ultimately, Scrum, I think, can provide a good framework for using AI in a different way. So let's go back to that finite versus infinite game. So, the finite is known players, fixed rules, clear beginning, end, objective, win, even though you don't know actually what winning means. Yes. So I was just thinking of a ran there for a minute, sorry. Anyway, optimize for the sprint. Optimize for the sprint. You've got to finish that sprint. You've got to get that velocity. Success is ultimately beating somebody else. And, let's just win by shipping that feature. The infinite gain, known and unknown players. So we're continuously testing. So this is the reason why we release things before a sprint review, to get feedback on it, because we don't know who's going to be using it. A lot of people use sprint reviews as a release gate. What was that all about? I don't know. We have to continuously evolve our rules, no endpoint. Keep playing. Success is basically having a product that people want, people need, stakeholders want to invest in. That's what we're aspiring to. And ultimately, the job is to outlast uncertainty, continuously manage that backlog to drive that, because we're all about creating lasting value. And, here's some elements. So sprint goals. How many people have a sprint, an OKR type sprint goal? Or 3, or 4, or 6, or 9, or 10?
Rarely one.
Rarely one, right? The reason why we encourage having one sprint goal is focus is obviously key, but we also see the power of a sprint goal is the way it can unify and create innovation in a team. And when you're dealing with uncertainty, a goal is a much better than a task. Outcomes are obviously key for that. Built-in evolution, obviously sprint, the retrospective, the backlog is never done. Interestingly though, and this is something we're going to talk about with AI, the role of backlog, I think, is changing. So they're talking about daily, a lot of people talk about daily sprints now with the use of AI. You can potentially do daily sprints. And Jeff's been talking a lot about that with his OpenClaw project, where he's built a Scrum team and he's literally driving that Scrum team, and it's delivering incredibly frequently. This is Jeff Sutherland, the co-creator of Scrum. The biggest reason why we have a sprint isn't that as such, not the delivery cadence, it's the review and feedback cadence. So your sprint length ultimately should be defined not by how much stuff you can do, though that does play into it, but more importantly, when will we get the right stakeholders to provide a review? Now, some people say continuous delivery is the continuous value delivery is the future, and we won't have these constructs called sprints. And they may be right, and that might fundamentally change the idea of Scrum. However, from experience, regular cadence is really important for human beings, and rich human beings, also known as senior stakeholders, really love it even more. They quarterly business reviews, quarterly planning, they love that routine because they fit it into their schedule. So it's really hard to see how you can operate in a continuous moment. And people say, well, you just release stuff and then get feedback using AI bots, etc. Experience would also indicate that getting those people together, those humans together in a meeting can be incredibly valuable to actually hear other people talk about the things, because you learn things, particularly if that meeting is well facilitated. So, trying to get that alignment is crucial, and I think Scrum is really ultimately designed around the infinite game. There are some interesting characteristics, particularly around the values. Courage. Say what's true, not what is comfortable. Reveal impediments early, share failures as learning. Courage to adapt, change course mid-sprint if needed, retire features that don't deliver value. Challenge to the roadmap. All of these things, courage is an incredibly important thing. courage, I think, is crucial in Scrum, and unfortunately is something we don't talk enough about. We're halfway through. And so I think that and that's a human characteristic, not an AI characteristic that we need to sort of develop. But the world is changing, and AI is sort of like, though, this infinite game works nicely, and the ideas of Scrum seem to be incredibly relevant in this ever-changing AI landscape. Agile methods, the meeting in Snowbird was based on these 5 things, foundation of assumptions, requirements are uncertain and merge for iteration, short feedback loops reduce risk, small cross-functional teams are optimal unit of delivery, working software is the primary measure of progress, build cycles is the bottleneck worth optimizing. What happens if AI changes all of those things? Now, I would argue that it can't, and that would be my natural response. However, it's a really interesting thought experiment. What would the world look like? Let's not have these assumptions. Cross-functional teams, for instance. One of the reasons why we have cross-functional teams is to build a done increment requires you to have a cross-functional team of human beings that bring all those different skills. That diversity creates both innovation, but also allows you to actually do stuff. Very important. What happens if AI provides all of that? What happens if you actually have an agent that does regulatory affairs? You've got an agent with appropriate context that can build amazing software. You've got an agent that does great testing. What happens if you have an agent? Do you need to have a cross-functional team? Is it just one person called a product person delivering value? Does functional team, do you need that anymore? I would argue that the value of a team is the diverse perspective and experience and judgment, all very human characteristics. Do you need as many of them? Interestingly, I was at Rabobank 2 weeks ago in Amsterdam. No, it was in Utrecht, actually, which is very pretty, actually. If you've ever in the Netherlands, always worth going to Utrecht. Anyway, and I was talking to them, and they were talking about some changes to they're experimenting with some changes to their operating model. And one of those changes is they were doing big, safe kind of squads, teams, all that stuff. And they had, for a value stream, they had multiple teams working together on one value stream, right? Usual. So they had to do big room planning, and basically coordination was incredibly complicated and required a lot of effort. So you've got multiple teams. And the teams were really built around the functional systems and expertise in those functional systems. Usual, here's what most organizations are. They're saying, well, hang on a minute. Why do we need so many teams? So what they did was, and maybe driven by the CFO more than their actual desires, but let's ignore that for a second, is they consolidated to 2 or 3 teams for the value stream from 12, 14 teams, and reduce the numbers and basically increase the size of the teams, interestingly, not massively, still less than 12 people, but they increased the size of the teams and then ultimately reduce the amount of coordination between the teams necessary. And they were more successful because the coordination costs were reduced. Obviously, we know a lot about that from team topologies, etc. Not rocket science. But I said, so what have you done? I mean, ultimately, those teams were required because of the expertise in the systems, right? Well, a couple of things. One, it turns out that actually most of the people in those teams are actually required to manage the coordination with the other teams. Well, that was a bit of a worry. And secondly, AI could provide, because it's very good at analyzing things and providing transparency and all that kind of mumbo jumbo, they could augment one person with that expertise in a team that had multiple different expertise. Interesting. So is 7 plus or minus 2 a good number anymore? Do we need that? Is that the right, is the thing? Cross-functional teams still seem to be the thing, etc. So the other thing is working software. I can build a lot of working software with Claude Code. Working is interesting, but I can deliver a lot of stuff. My son and I built March Madness is a basketball event, college basketball event. It's a lot of fun. Yes, even though some of the kids don't look like they should be in college anymore. and there's a lot of very tall people. But so we had this manual thing for doing our picks and then doing scores. And I said, hey, it's raining. It was a Sunday, and we built an app to do it. And I know you can just go onto the Yahoo site or the ESPN site, etc. But we just built it just for shits and giggles, right? Incredibly fast. It was just great. Working software, ever so easy. And I felt like we'd made a lot of progress. However, the value, I'm not so sure. Measuring working software as the primary measure of progress surely is something that this negates massively, right? Value is the ultimate measure of progress. Now, value is both subjective, owned by people outside of the team, and hard to measure in most large organizations, particularly if they're a small cog in a much bigger value stream, as it were. So how do we change Scrum and things like that so value becomes front and center? Yes, 2020 we did make it all about value, right, with the changes to the Scrum Guide. But really, did we? Value is a bit like culture. Nobody really understands it, but everybody talks about it infinitely. Culture being the magic that makes organizations work that we don't understand. So is that still the best way of measuring progress? And obviously, the build cycle goes without saying. So let's look at AI and the fundamental speed paradox that we're seeing. So AI dramatically accelerates individual output. I can build a lot more stuff. Blogs, PowerPoint, all that sort of stuff. Code generated, content crafted in minutes, not days, all that stuff. However, all the data points to the fact that most organizations aren't seeing the value come out. So there's a speed paradox here. And haven't we been talking about this for years? Systems thinking, I think it began many, many years ago. We talked about optimizing at the wrong place in the value cycle. Local optimization is the phrase we use. AI potentially can do a huge amount of local optimization. Unfortunately, the optimization also comes at a cost in that value cycle. Because the cognitive load, we're hearing a lot more developers in particular, because they're the first people that have really been, with Copilot doing it aggressively. Developers ultimately are burning out more. We talked about that today in the leadership thing that we did. We're seeing massive amount of burnout because there's just so much shit that it generates. My wife turns 50 next year. And she must be so grateful that I told you all. And luckily, she doesn't plan to come to Leeds. It wasn't on her list, surprisingly, it turns out. But so I'm like, okay, Claude. She wants this particular type of holiday, and this, and we have these very expensive things in our family called children that we've got to deal with, and we've got all these constraints and timing, and there's certain things I don't like doing. There's lots of things I don't like doing. It turns out I've become a grumpy old man, Victor Meldrew notwithstanding, and so I built this very clear sort of context for AI, and it solved the problem, but blimmin' heck, I was like, wow, there's this, and it's pages of it says we should go to Croatia. It says that we should fly from East Midlands Airport. It says that we should drop my kids off. It's built an itinerary. I was like, it's basically said what my kids can do with their grandparents and their aunts and uncles whilst we're away. It's told me all of this stuff. I'm completely overwhelmed. I'm not doing it yet. It's just scary. Imagine that at work. It just happens all the time. The other thing that AI is doing is it's creating the opportunity to go off. So somebody used the phrase, it's addictive today, to describe when you're using AI. It is. I've had the best Friday afternoons recently because I've been I've built this quite interesting context beast that allows me to rapidly experiment with changes to the Scrum guide, changes to Nexus, changes to all of this, and I can do it. It's brilliant. I'm like a teenage boy in their bedroom. And, sorry, that's probably a bit inappropriate, but I am in England. I was thinking, in America, I would be thrown out now. I certainly wouldn't get a visa. Anyway, if I put it on Twitter. But the point is, it's just like so much fun. But then, of course, everything that we create, we have to coordinate. We have to deliver. We have to review. We have to, suddenly, all those teams. You know what we need? We need a bloody Scrum Master. Oh, hang on, we just fired them, unfortunately. But we're increasing the capability, and we're not necessarily increasing the capability, increasing our ability to deliver stuff, but not the capability to deal with it. So let's lean into some of those things again that we just talked about. Sprint goal is really important when you've got the ability to do everything. And the sprint goal is a guardrail, not just in terms of the direction we're going, but the ability to stop. You don't need to keep going. Perfection is a great journey, but it's not a destination that we seek. Definition of done becomes incredibly important, but it needs to include clear understanding of what we expect of the AI tools that we're deploying. The daily Scrum actually is much more important now than it's ever been because of the sheer volume of stuff that's being generated. And so a lot of organizations that are doing this now use AI to effectively prepare for their daily Scrums so that we're talking about what we've discovered. So they're applying the definition of done. They're building those things out continuously and reporting on that on a daily basis. And of course, any good sprint review talks about the outcomes and should focus on that. And it's a checkpoint to ensure we're going in the right direction. So does Scrum now become a governance framework for AI in an AI augmented team? Is governance perhaps where we're seeing the most value? Maybe. And that's an because people don't think of Scrum as a governance mechanism. They think of it purely as a delivery tool. But maybe it is a governance mechanism. As a slide we used earlier today, AI is not a tool, it's a team design problem. This is 68% for AM on 12 months organization. But only 23% of organizations are actively thinking about how to govern AI. Who owns the output? You do. As much as we would like when we're using self-drive in a Tesla, is that allowed in the UK? No, you. Also, is anybody driving on the M1 at the moment? What the hell's going on? How fast can I drive? 1 minute it's 60, then it's 40. Let's do 50, because we've not done that for a minute. I was expecting to see 42.5. You know, I think they're just trying to catch you out. I don't think it's got anything to do with anything other than money. Very sensible. I applaud them for it. But oh my God. Anyway, in America, we have self-drive. Self-drive. If you kill somebody whilst it's in self-drive, Elon Musk is not going to get arrested as much as we would like him to. And actually, so don't try it, because I know many people would kill a few people just to get him arrested. You're responsible. I would argue that the Scrum Master on a team, delivery lead, whatever you call them, I forget now, but needs to be responsible for this. That when decisions are being made, when choices are being made, suddenly we're starting to have to build that knowledge into the system. The Scrum Master is responsible for the system. The product owner is responsible for the value. The Scrum Master is responsible for the system. And don't say, oh, it's everybody, developer team. Because if it's developers, nobody's going to be responsible. If it's everybody, it's nobody. You need somebody that's accountable for this. So looks like there's a key opportunity for the Scrum Master to manage this. The product owner also is an incredibly important stuff. So the things that stay, that maximizing value, stakeholder relationships. Stakeholder relationships, surprisingly, unfortunately, can't be dealt with AI. It can help you write better emails. It can help you prepare for discussions better. It can, keep an eye on all the things the stakeholder's doing, look at their schedule, etc., and make sure they're not flirting with other products. But unfortunately, it can't build those relationships. Why becomes much more important. But what changes is, particularly discovery. I think the biggest power of AI today, ultimately, is the ability to do multiple options, to do option analysis. We're talking about Formula One today and the ability for, the aerodynamics and simulation and having multiple options, reviewing them, seeing what happens. Every team can be doing that. Discovery becomes a real first-class citizen, and it's not something that's described in Scrum at all, which is annoying and something we should fix. We've got to fix it. I think that ultimately every sprint you're going to be doing a lot of discovery, or you're going to spend, particularly with Mythos, you're going to be spending most of the sprint fixing the bugs that Mythos has discovered in the security of your application. So it's going to be doing some discovery, a lot of bug fixes, and a little bit of the actual sprint goal, which is kind of worrying. They're going to have to be doing a lot more market sensing. As a product owner, I historically have spent very little time thinking about Scrum Alliance, SAFe, all of those things. AI is brilliant. I can run continuously. I have a little AI agent that runs every day and looks at loads of places that I trust and tells me what people are doing, and synthesizes it into a competitive analysis report every day. I mean, I mostly ignore it, like any good product owner, but it's good to have. The other thing that's really interesting about AI, from my experience and from the organizations I've talked to, is context is king, right? So who manages the product context? That doesn't mean do it all, but make sure that it's done. Version controlling. Remember those very structured methods? We're going to have to start bringing some of that back, because AI doesn't know the stuff that we all take for granted. So product owners are going to be managing context. Scrum Masters are going to be the catalyst for AI adoption in the system. Product owners are going to be the catalyst for AI in the context of the product. And Scrum Master comes back in also in terms of being that AI collaboration coach, AI fluency. So we're going from literacy, which most of us are now pretty AI literate, I'd say, to fluency. And then we can start seeing how it affects operating models, I think. The difference between fluency and literacy is the difference between vocab and being able to order a beer, chat up somebody in a pub, maybe also, order a nice steak or dinner or something. The ability to communicate in that language. And with LLMs, it is a language, it's a discussion, right? So fluency becomes important. I would say all of the Scrum Masters in this room need to take ownership of the fluency of their teams. And that means, obviously, understanding where you're at, doing some sort of assessment of the capabilities, building a little bit of a roadmap for how people can change, sitting with people to help them. Even if you don't feel comfortable with the tools yourself, ultimately you're responsible for that fluency, because you're navigating in this strange new world. You can see obviously the governance elements there as well. You can see that the paying critical attention to really deciding whether the stuff is good or bad, not necessarily knowing what's good or bad, but asking the questions of the people that are working with the stuff to ensure that. So I think that hybrid teams are going to be the most, well, depending what happens with the monetarization of AI, so this could all horribly stop instantly, or what happens with Mythos and the work that's basically sort of highlighting the fact that every single hacker in the world now is as good as a state-sponsored hacker. So assuming that those things don't become critical, and assuming that it's more of the abundance available and everything's going well, then organizations by 2027 will be building these very elaborate hybrid teams where you've got humans there that own the outcomes, T-shaped, cross-functional experts in a domain. You've got AI agents doing the work, most of the work, and then you've got the Scrum infrastructure focusing on people on goals, ensuring with DoD that the output is up to scratch. You'll still obviously be working with stakeholders, so the events will be human, and empiricism. So backlogs are going to go from a series of tasks to a series of hypotheses and clear outcomes that we're trying to measure against. We're also going to see, I don't want to call it an agile, well, I'm going to call it an agile product operating model because I've been writing quite a lot about it, but the operating model will change. I think that the alignment to, when I say products, I'm really meaning business outcomes. Teams will be built around markets and customers in a more tight way. And the reason why is because that context, that knowledge, we will lose if we're not careful, because when you don't know how the software works or the systems work or the technology works, you need some stability in the organization. Strategy is a continuous hypothesis that you're measuring. So how you effectively serve these stakeholders and these customers will be changing continuously. The outputs, story points, all of that stuff, completely irrelevant because it has no value. It's like lines of code. Remember Kokomo and SLOCs and all of that, which is a huge thing in the 80s, I guess. That's all gone now because it has no value. I can write millions of lines of code without, and in fact, you just for giggles, when you're using Claude Code or anything like that, say to it after it's built the thing, can you make this longer? And it will write more code. It's brilliant. I mean, I don't know. And it still works. I have no idea what that code's doing. But I don't think it does. Well, obviously it doesn't, right? As well. So which do you do as an organization now? Team fluency becomes an important thing. So let's start investing in that. So it's not just about individual tools, it's about how teams work collectively with AI. So it's basically building those prompt libraries, it's building those context models, it's sort of having shared context that you can share, you can take around. At Scrum.org, we're putting a lot of effort into this at the moment, with the idea that it's going to increase our productivity significantly. At the moment, it's highlighting the fact that everybody's got different opinions of who our customers are, what they value PSM1s, and which is useful, and we probably should have done that anyway. So it's annoying that it's good. Governance is an important area that I think we have to understand accountabilities and start really documenting it. And I think that sort of describing when we make choices and documenting it becomes so much more important than it ever has before, because it's not just about people. I obviously would argue this, but ignoring the titles Scrum Master and Product Owner, we need somebody that cares about the system and the team that's executing that system. And every organization needs somebody that's worried about value, right? You need those two accountabilities, whatever they're called, but we need to double down on those accountabilities. They need to be the most senior and supported. They need to be not just given the title, but given the authority to do the things necessary. And I think most organizations have added on top of an existing authority model, Scrum Masters and product owners, without really thinking about that element. And of course, it's all going to be about outcomes. It's all about outcomes at the end of the day. We were discussing in this round table earlier about how you measure the success of AI and the value of AI. And we were talking, a lot about, cycle time as an indicator. The ultimate value is business value. Obviously, it's a lagging indicator, but it is ultimately the most important thing. But most organizations still are not set up to do that effectively. And yes, at the top level you are, but there's a massive gulf between the top level value, which translates into earnings per share, et cetera, and the work that a person is doing. So that's still a lot of work to be done there. So that's what organizations do. Let's finish with what should individuals do. Empirical judgment is crucial. AI is great with data, it's great with opinions and options, but it's your job to provide judgment and wisdom. The ability to write good hypotheses, the ability to build great OKRs, the ability to craft amazing experiments, the ability to rapidly assemble those experiments into plans that we can execute against. That's what good Agile people are going to be good at. You still have teams of people that feel very disconnected. Some of them are burning out because AI is generating millions of lines of code and doing too much. Some of them are nervous where they're going to fit in these organizations. It is a responsibility of Scrum Masters in particular, but anybody in this community, to build that sense of belonging and create those teams, because I think that's really, really important. Bring that team, be curious, be inquisitive, but be positive. Learning is a real challenge now. I run not only the competitive analysis on a daily basis, but I have a bunch of things that I run continuously. And then I use AI to summarize that because I've only got 10 minutes. And I use Notepad LM, like everybody else, to quickly build something that I can listen to while I'm on the Peloton or whatever. Those things become really important. But a lot of people don't invest enough time and energy in that. Learning is a responsibility of every human being here. That is what makes us special. It's a gift. And we need to be leaning into that. Treat your career as a product backlog. But really, yeah. You've got a lot of people against you now, the Agile is dead movement in particular. But you've got the opportunity to decide why you're really here. What are the things that will make you better as human beings? How you can influence change. And I think there's a great opportunity there to do that. That product goal is something I'm interested in. Here's 3 things. All right, run an AI audit in retrospective around fluency. We've got it's not out yet, but I can send a draft not good white paper on this. It's not out yet. Have a look at your DoD. Make sure that AI is in mind. That's from both an inspection perspective, but also a governance perspective. And talk to your team about the infinite game. What are you trying to do? What does winning, is it all about winning or is it all about survival? Is it all about, try to understand that element. Because I think that's very important to do. You're already playing the infinite game, ladies and gentlemen. Your job is to keep playing. That's what life is. And Agile gives you tools to effectively do that. Scrum gives you the rules, the techniques. Agile gives you those things. Uncertainty gives you the reason. You bring the energy, the passion, dare I say the courage. I remember when I created this slide, I got all emotional and was like, oh, this is I felt like Les Miserables, where you hear the band swim. But I was storming the barricades and cutting off Anne Hathaway's hair. Now when you read it in the cold day and in front of a bunch of Yorkshire people, you're like, oh my God, that is a bit salesy, isn't it? But it's true. Maybe we're not quite Les Miserables yet. The reason why Les Miserables happened was because of a technology change that fundamentally brought people from the fields to the factories in France. Technology drove an environment that created a middle class, that created an opportunity for revolution. The reason why America exists is because of the printing press, in part. I mean, there's lots of other reasons, and not the landmass. America, the country, not the country, the human beings there doing what we do in the way that we do them. The technology change is a catalyst for human change, and sometimes humans are very bad at changing, and that's the reason why there's always wars, poverty, horrible things that happen. AI is that. You don't think it's a coincidence that Peter Thiel and gang got behind Donald Trump and won him the election when ChatGPT, November, almost 3 years ago, came out. You don't think that's a coincidence, right? It's not. This technology is going to change the world. And there's a small group of lords, dukes, whatever you want to call it, that want to drive that and create a society that supports them doing it. It's really interesting what's happening in the world. But we have the ability to take their special source and use it to drive good and value in our organizations and augment our teams in a more positive way. And that's what Agile gives us. Ignoring all the frameworks and the certs and all that bullshit, the people. Oh yeah, and I've got to go. I've been told to time out, sorry. But I think this is important. I think we have that opportunity. And I think Scrum could be a great tool. But I'm also willing to change Scrum, to improve it, to be a better tool. So I need your help, because you're doing this every day. So that's my call for action for you to help me do that. Scrum might need to change. Do we do 2-week sprints? Do we do backlogs? What's that team size? Where does value management replace product management? That's an interesting idea, right? How do we evolve those two roles? And even developer as well. Maybe I should have put that. I just ran out of room. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Hopefully, there's a few things that are interesting, useful. Maybe it's just re-energized you. Or maybe it just stopped you from going to sleep in the afternoon in the sun as it beats in here. But thank you for giving me this opportunity. And please, as you use AI with Scrum, let us know what's working, what isn't, what should we change? Because we don't have all the answers yet. And that's it, I guess. Any questions? We're going to do it in the panel, apparently. Sorry. Thank you.